Welcome to the Navy Memorial SITREP, and thank you for joining us today. Excuse me. And I should say Happy New Year. This is our first program of the year. We've got a great year lined up. We've got some great SITREPs. We've got some great fantail breakfast, bridge-wing chats. And then before long, we'll be doing the Blessing of the Fleet on April 15th. And then we run into our movies on the Memorial, our concerts on the Avenue. And before long, we'll be having promotion ceremonies and retirement ceremonies, re-enlistment ceremonies here at the Navy Memorial. We're open for business 9:30 to 5, and we're looking forward to the thousands of visitors that are going to come as Washington warms up, and our online events for you all online, so you'll be able to enjoy them. So as you know, here at the Navy Memorial, our mission is to honor, recognize, and celebrate the men and women of the sea services, past, present, and future, and to inform the public about their service. And that's what this program is about today, is that word inform. Today's live, interactive, online event is available to naval enthusiasts around the country. And as you can see on the platform, you can ask questions. So that's a big part of this, is to make sure that the American people are informed about what their Navy's doing. We're honored today that our guest is the Navy's Chief of Chaplains, Rear Admiral Greg Todd. Before I introduce him, though, I'd like to say thank you to Navy Mutual Aid Life Insurance, who's been a big supporter of the Navy Memorial over the years and is again sponsoring the SITREP Speaker Series. As you all, Navy Mutual Aid provides life insurance to those who serve, as well as those who have served, as well as annuities, and they're just a good organization who's focused on the betterment of the Navy and the Navy family, and quite frankly, all the military. So now it is my honor to introduce the Chief of Chaplains, Rear Admiral Greg Todd. You know, I normally don't go through a biography, and I won't today, but I would like to touch on some highlights of Admiral Todd's career, because it's noteworthy with his operational experience and the situation and the challenges of sailors, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen today. Admiral Todd has served on Navy and Marine Corps shore stations. He served with the Coast Guard. He served on board as a chaplain of the USS Chancellorsville, the cruiser, as well as the amphibious assault ship USS Kearsarge, and with the Marines, with the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force. He's led in the schoolhouse. And on 9/11, Chaplain Todd was stationed with the Coast Guard and was one of the first people to show up at Ground Zero and hosted the Coast Guard Emergency Response Team, helping emergency workers and civilians. He served as the chaplain of the Coast Guard. Yep. And the chaplain of the Marine Corps. Yep. And now, as the Navy's Chief of Chaplains, is responsible for religious ministry for more than 570,000 sailors, Marines, Coast Guardmen, as well as their families. So it is my honor, Chaplain Todd, to introduce you to welcome you to the SITREP.
Thanks, Frank. Great to be here. Just great to be in the job. Been in the job not quite a year now, so it's proving to be extremely exciting and a lot of fun.
That's great. So let's just jump right in. Sure. You know, the focus today on human factors has just increased significantly. You find yourself here as a Chief of Chaplains in a time when we're focused on the wellness of our sailors and all that. Can you kind of just start with an overview and your role as the Chief of Chaplains?
Yeah, great. Of course, you mentioned it, 570,000 active duty personnel along with their families. We have about 1,100 chaplains across the reserve and active components, along with the religious program specialists. And so we're spread thin across 3 different services, but really our mission is to take care of the spiritual readiness of the flock, of the warfighter and their family as they prepare for conflict. We kind of divide our role into 4 different areas. We talk about facilitating for people of all faiths. We talk about care for the sailor, advising command, but also finally, you know, providing services according to our own faith tradition. So we've got about over 100 different faith groups in the Chaplain Corps now.
Really?
Yeah, so it's fascinating. We've got active duty Buddhist chaplains. This last year, we hoisted the Buddhist chaplain pennant for the first time above a ship as our Buddhist chaplain conducted services. We've got Muslim chaplains, of course, Jewish chaplains, and a variety of Christian chaplains. So it's an exciting time to be in the Chaplain Corps.
So, Chaplain Todd, you mentioned the word spiritual readiness,
Yeah.
and I've heard you refer to that in the past. Matter of fact, I heard the CNO refer to that in the past. What do you mean by the term spiritual readiness?
Yeah, so, readiness is the coin of the realm, right? We're getting ready for conflict, ready for the fight. And there is, of course, the material readiness of the fleet. But when we talk spiritual readiness, we're talking about that personal readiness. And this is something that our sailors are taught at boot camp, that we are, as humans, mind, body, spirit. And that spiritual dimension needs to be attended to. Now, are we saying religious? It occupies the same space, but that's not what we're talking about. It's just that fact that there's a dimension to humanity that is spiritual, just like there's physical and mental aspects of humanity.
So, what is the separation there between spiritual readiness and religion, right? So the challenge of what you do, are we saying that a sailor, Marine Coast Guardsman needs to be religious to be spiritual ready? What is that? How does that connect?
Yeah, so I guess that's where it gets confusing, because they really do operate in the same space. For some people, their spiritual readiness is a connection to religion, connection to the divine. But through the research that we've been doing with Navy analysts, Navy researchers up in Bethesda, we've noticed there's really 4 dimensions to spiritual readiness. Of course, the religious aspect of connection to a higher power, connection with a religious community. But the non-religious aspects, a life of pursuing meaning, purpose, and values, that's often associated with religion, but that not necessarily so. Or the 4th dimension is a life of sacrifice, or pursuing a life of sacrifice. And again, that's often connected with religion, but not necessarily so. So any of those 4 elements of spiritual readiness are the things that connect you, that build that spiritual readiness. And some have all 4 avenues, but some have just a couple.
So let me make sure I get the 4. I think I missed the 3rd. Give me the 4 elements again.
So it's a connection to the divine, a connection with a community of faith, so both connections there. It's pursuing a life of meaning, purpose, and values. And then the 4th is pursuing a life of sacrifice for the greater good. And again, so that gives a kind of a broad applicability that can be whether you're a religious person or not a religious person. It acknowledges that you have that aspect of your humanity, a spirit, that thing that impels you to do the right thing, drives you to be a person of good character, or in the midst of a challenging situation, to rush in to try to do the right thing, rush into a burning space when your shipmates need you to get in there and take care of it.
So the connection there, I mean, back when Admiral Clark was CNO, he coined the phrase, "Your service matters."
Yeah.
And so it seems to be, and has been for a long time, just seems to be more in the forefront now, that connection with service. With we like to say, serving in the military, you're doing something bigger than yourself.
Right.
And I think, is that what you're talking about when you say spiritual readiness?
Yeah, it is. It's bigger than yourself. The phrase that gets applied to this by the researchers is transcendence. So being connected with something bigger than ourselves. What's crazy is we think we've run across something new here. It's absolutely not new. This is what the ancients wrestled with. This is what warriors for centuries have attended to, is how do I connect with something bigger than myself? And that's what we're talking about in terms of spiritual readiness. And quite frankly, it's the thing that drives you to do the hard stuff, is that you're connected, you're transcendent to that thing that drives you.
And so that connection that you're focused on, it doesn't really focus on how religious somebody is. It almost seems like the elements you're talking about can apply throughout the spectrum of somebody's religious acumen, whether they're very focused on it or not focused on it at all.
Exactly. And again, this is important for us, is that we put it on the individual. This is not something that we force on them and say, now this is how you're going to do it. It's the same when we talk about physical fitness, mental fitness. We create a space where we can normalize that and say, hey, you need to work out. You need to take care of that. Whether you're a runner, a lifter, whatever you're going to do, you just need to pay attention to it and get after it. Same with mental fitness. Hey, here's the Calm Down's reading list. Here's the things, here's some school to get after it. But you're in the driver's seat. And the same in the realm of spiritual fitness. Hey, shipmate, you're in the driver's seat on this. It's just, you need to attend to it as part of your humanity. This is who you are. And of course, chaplains and religious program specialists stand by as kind of like coaches in the whole deal. It's not one of those deals where we're pressuring, but we're supporting, drawing alongside, helping the sailor, Marine, Coast Guardsman, or family member kind of work through the issue themselves.
So when you compare it to words like physical fitness, physically ready, right? I grew up in that world. I know what that means. I inherently know physical fitness. It helps my heart. It helps my endurance. It helps my ability to respond to that fire, as you mentioned.
Right.
What is the equivalence there in spiritual readiness? In other words, what is if a sailor's spiritual ready, what does that mean as compared to if they're not?
Yeah. So, for me, we're outcome-based organization. What's the outcome? What are we going to see out of this? I think we're going to see it in character. So we're going to see a reduction in NJP. We're going to see more of a connection to the mission. We're going to see a reduction in morale issues because of the attendance to spiritual readiness. You're going to see a growth in character. You're going to see a better person, a better sailor, better Marine, better Coast Guardsman. That's the outcome base. Now, we don't want to turn spiritual readiness into just simply a tool that gets applied. But not only does it bring better character, a lot of the studies, the researchers we're working with, there's one particularly, Tyler Vanderweel up at Harvard, who talks about the sense of health, of well-being for the individual. You just feel better. Your life is better as a result. And of course, for chaplains, we would love for people's lives to be better. That's what we're all about, taking care of the person.
So you've touched on the tough part of this, though, right? Is data.
Yeah.
Is how does the Navy know that this is having a difference? So, again, not to go back to the simple, which may tell you a little bit about me, but the physical fitness, right? We can measure physical fitness standards. We can tie that to the ability to operate in strenuous. How do whether it's data or how do you? I don't want to use the word measure. How do you know? How do you brief when the CNO looks at you and talks about spiritual readiness?
Yeah.
How do you talk about this in terms that you've grown up with in your operational roles as spiritual readiness?
Yeah, so typically chaplains think about these sorts of things in the individual. How is the individual person, and we can address those sorts of things. But really, for a leader, for CNO, community leaders, that sort of thing, they're concerned about the aggregate, the group. How's the group doing? And we've got some data in that regard. This all kind of grew out of the SOF community. So we've done a lot of research with SEALs and other members of the Special Operating Forces, and this is a critical element to the human performance. Marine Corps also is bringing in spirituality as a critical element to human performance, and there's a lot of data associated with it. in addition to the academic world, we've done 30 years of longitudinal studies about human flourishing and well-being associated with spirituality. But in the direct application, right here in the operational world, SWOBOS a couple years ago asked for us to start putting chaplains on board as part of ship's company on board the destroyers, the DDGs. And the data that's coming as a result of that is there's a reduction in a lot of the bad behavior sorts of things, the NJP, the low morale issues, the retention issues. It's apparent that the chaplains, or at least having the chaplains on board, are change agents. Can we pinpoint it exactly how that change happens? Not yet, but we do know that there's some sort of concurrent effect of attending to people's spirituality, their spiritual readiness within that command, and creating a venue where it's okay, and then its resultant impact on some of these negative behaviors.
So this explains why. I understand, and I think it's out there. I don't know that it's news, but it might be. I apologize if I jump ahead of you, but I understand that you're putting chaplains on destroyers now. That deploying destroyers will have chaplains. Does this go to what you're saying here?
Yeah.
And how are you going to do that? I mean, that's a pretty significant investment.
It is. So yeah, we're growing the Corps. First time since the end of the Cold War, we're growing the chaplain Corps. And so this is probably going to result in an addition of about 90 chaplains. And of course, we've got a staggered approach to this. But yeah, Navy's hiring. And I'm trying to beat the bushes to say to the religious organizations of America, send us your best. It's a great opportunity. It's a great place to work. I mean, man, of course I love the Navy. You know, we love the Navy. Mm-hmm. But for me, if I were to push it or to really hold up what's unique about this ministry, it's the interaction with 18 to 25-year-olds. We're just immersed in it. We're immersed in a world of leadership. And I would challenge any brand new graduate from a seminary. I said, how big's your congregation going to be? Oh, I might get 50, I might get 100. Oh, what would you think if I sent you to a battalion of 800 Marines surrounded by people who talk about leadership all the time? Do you think you might learn a little about leadership? It's amazing. It's a great place to work. It's operating in the public square, not kind of confined to the, to the church on the corner, but here we are, interacting with the whole Navy and trying to impact the institution for the better. What a great opportunity.
So growing the chaplain Corps by, I think you said 90?
Yeah.
And I think there's 800 and some chaplains?
Yeah, active right now we have about 870-ish. But hopefully in the next 5 years, we hope to grow that additional 90. But also, I would say the Coast Guard has put us on notice that they intend to ask for more. Small numbers comparatively, but still ask for more. And the Marine Corps as well is looking at the question of adding more chaplains. So right now, there's a realization that this spiritual readiness does have an impact on the operational forces. If you attend to the individual readiness in the aggregate, you're also building the readiness of the unit, of the team.
So just to clarify, and I think most people are aware of this, the Navy provides the chaplains for the Marine Corps and the Coast Guard, a la you being the Chief of Marine Corps, Chief of Chaplains for the Marine Corps and Chief of Chaplains for the Coast Guard.
Yeah.
So it's growing in the Navy and in the Marine Corps and the Coast Guard.
Yeah.
So let me. There's a question here from the audience, and this kind of goes to what you're saying about growing. And the question deals with chaplains on bases.
Yeah.
And the recent several years decision to reduce the number of active duty chaplains on bases.
Right.
What's the status of that of that plan? And I'll add to it the concern for spiritual readiness ashore.
Yeah, that's one of those decisions I don't think anybody was comfortable with, but one that was necessary. So as the numbers reduced, where where did we have the greater need? Of course, forward deployed. So the people at the pointy end of the spear, we want to make sure they have the support they need. The OPFOR, all the operating forces, that's priority. And so we decided to take risk at the installation. Not what I'm comfortable with, though, I'll be honest with you, because the reality of it is a strong family also makes a strong sailor, Marine, or Coast Guardsman. There's a great element from Stephen Pressfield's book, Gates of Fire. You remember the Battle of Thermopylae? And in there, Pressfield, he talks in another book about, he intentionally wrote in there a scene about King Leonidas, how he picked the warriors, the 300 that would go to their deaths, and he picked them on the basis of the strength of their family. Because without a strong family, he knew that Sparta would fall. That's a truism, I think, for us as people in the institution. We have to be cognizant of families in addition to the warriors also. That's why I'm not comfortable with that decision. What we're starting this year is really trying to build a skill set within our chaplain corps to do a better job at connecting with the civilian resources that are outside the gate. That's our mitigating strategy. So if we're not going to have them on the bases, how do we build better relationships with all those communities of faith that surround the base? Out there in Pac Fleet, Admiral Paparo, he did a great job. His chaplain gathered up all as many of the religious leaders on Oahu that he could, and to build those relationships. And Admiral Paparo came out and talked to them all individually. And that's kind of what we're thinking is, let's bring more people in on the team, and let's reach out to the civilian community to help us out with that.
So let's drill down that a little bit, though.
Yeah.
Ashore or afloat, it sounds to me like you're trying to get ahead of the problem.
Yeah.
How do you do that? I mean,
Yeah.
How do you, whether it's in a resource-constrained world or
Right.
dealing with humanity and being able to mind read,
Right. Right.
How do you do that? Bring it maybe back to spiritual readiness,
Right.
Which obviously, as you say, includes the family ashore. But how do you get ahead of the problem? Or maybe I should say the head of the challenge before you even know it's a problem.
Right. Well, and gosh, I hate to give that tried and true answer, but it's a leadership issue, isn't it? So we learned during COVID that, virtual presence was akin to virtual absence. It really means you got to be with people, kneecap to kneecap, eyeball to eyeball, to walk with them as they grow, as they mature. We've got these young people who join the services, America's greatest treasure, given to us. And yet they're really kind of adults in training. They're new in the game of being an adult. What is required is for us who've been doing this for a while to draw alongside and be there and walk with them through the process. So again, more chaplains for me, but again, it's also about building leadership skills in the chief's mess and really walking alongside our sailors.
So another way to look at this, I guess, is, we talk about the triad.
Yeah.
And I don't want to age myself, but back when I was on active duty, we didn't call it a triad. That's a fairly new term over the last decade or so, where the combination of the commanding officer, the executive officer, and the command master chief just become this integral role. I mean, here we are sitting in the National Chiefs Mess at the Navy Memorial, and that role of the chief that has so vastly improved. And you bring up leadership. It sounds to me like spiritual readiness becomes part, you're saying, that of leadership, and the role of the chaplain with the triad seems to be changing.
Yeah, I think it is changing because there's this tendency to put the chaplains in this box of clinician, care provider, counselor, which we do all of that, absolutely. But there's also a role for us to play as advisor and to help leadership craft the language, craft the environment where people are cared for And then spiritual readiness is all part of that environment. It was interesting, when I was chaplain of the Coast Guard, someone asked me, why is your office on the command deck? Where my office was right next door to the MCPOG. And down the hall was the commandant and the vice commandant. And that was that floor. And someone said, why is your office here? And I wasn't sure at first, but I reflected on it and thought, because it's a leadership job. Mm-hmm. It's about advising leaders and being a voice among many of how do we care about people and how do we help them. So
yeah, and it applies to readiness. I mean, it comes right back to the recognition that what the Chaplain Corps is about is readiness. Yeah. It's more than feel good. It's readiness.
Exactly. It's readiness for we'll say readiness for conflict, but readiness for challenge. It reminds me of Father O'Callahan, Medal of Honor recipient on board the Franklin, and it's fascinating to read about the battle because he begins the preparation by saying Mass. And then later on, as things get rough and there's fires and all this kind of stuff, and he confronts one of the sailors that was in his Mass, and he said, you're ready. We had Mass. Get in there and do what you got to do. I mean, that's an oversimplification of what our model here is, but maybe not. It's connecting people to that transcendent piece that gets them ready for conflict and ready to do the right thing.
Yeah. We're going to take a quick break.
Yeah.
We'll be right back. Short break. Please keep the questions coming. I notice we have a lot of questions here, and my commitment is to try to get to more of those here in the second block. This is a great conversation. Stay tuned.
The people we serve at Navy Mutual are like family.
Navy Mutual is a nonprofit organization
that was founded in 1879,
providing life insurance products,
service and education to members of the military service and their families.
We understand them because we have served ourselves.
Everything we do every day is about serving our members.
We treat them like we would treat our family.
It's all about the member.
Welcome back. Thank you again for joining us. Keep the questions going. We took a look at some of the questions. We'll get to them here. I want to come back, though, and talk about the role of the triad, mission accomplishment, spiritual readiness, these terms that, and, I had the utmost respect for chaplains back in the day, but we just didn't use those words with chaplains.
No.
And so this idea that chaplains become part of the leadership team, advising the leadership team. Can you drill down a little bit more in that? And I have to come clean and tell you that it was actually a Master Chief who recommended inviting you to be here today because he noticed the role of the chaplain. So can you drill down a little bit more, and maybe from a deck plate perspective or whatever, but the role of the chaplain, and there's a couple questions about religion and spirituality on the deck plates, but if I could just drill down a little bit more on the role of the chaplain in the readiness world.
Yeah, and again, this gets back to that question on, is all you do religious? Is that all you're about? And the reality of it is, it's actually a small percentage of the chaplain's overall day. The chaplain is people-focused. And if the chaplain's doing the job right, that chaplain's out of the office, walking the deck plates, connecting with sailors, and being able to get a pulse on just kind of that overall sense of how they're doing, and then to advise command, recognizing that there are many advisors within the command. It's not only the chaplain, but the scriptures say, with many advisors come wisdom. And so one more set of eyes, but tuned in a different way for the leadership.
Yeah. So question applies to this from Rick Burgess, which kind of teed up my question actually is, and I'll just read his question, how is being a shepherd to sailors now different than when you first became a chaplain?
Wow.
Some 20-some years ago.
Yeah. It was a few years ago. I started in a chaplain candidate program, and so was commissioned in 1986. So it's been a few years. Served as a reservist for a few years, and then came on active duty just because I thought, well, I'll do one tour. I really want to try it. And what I say is, the sailors, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen got under my skin, and I cannot let go. And that's just been the way it is forever. I think there are some things that are constant. The nature of humanity does not change. People are people and have been for centuries. So that aspect hasn't changed, but certainly the context, the social context that we're dealing with in our current age, it's very different. And so one of the skill sets of a good Navy chaplain is a cultural agility, being able to operate in different kind of cultural contexts and yet be able to bring that spiritual readiness, that coaching, that ability to connect with people. We talk about cultural agility. All three sea services are very different, and culturally.
Yeah.
And so chaplains have to be able to make the shift from what it's like in the Marine Corps to what it's like in the Navy or the Coast Guard. But I think that is also a cultural shift that'll happen over time. The young people we have coming in today, this is no secret, but the research shows that the support mechanisms, the support infrastructures like sports teams and like youth groups and churches and even some of the extracurricular stuff after school have diminished for this generation. So those others that help build the resiliency of the young people are not as prevalent as they were maybe when you and I were growing up. That's something we have to attend to. And so we've got young people coming in that haven't had as many coaches or as many adults in their life to help them get there to adulthood. So we're having to compensate for that. A lot of our leaders are saying, wow, it just seems like they need a lot more. Well, that's because they need a lot more. They do, and that's because they didn't have it when they were growing up. So I
didn't advertise this as being asking you to make a pitch for this, but I'm gonna ask you. So as you talk, it resonates to me. I played on church sports teams.
Right.
That the coach was a church leader.
Right.
I don't even think I realized it at the time
Right.
that the coach had walked out of church for practice. And so I'd like to give you a platform. A lot of our audience is in a position to impact the youth. And we talk a lot about the sailors, Marines, Coast Guardmen coming in today, haven't had that experience. Well, that's on us.
Yeah.
We're their parents.
Yeah.
And so what message do you have for those of us watching the show that how do we, what is our role in that, in trying to we talk also about the physical readiness of recruits and
Right.
and how our country's hurting in physical readiness. It sounds to me like you're saying we also have a spiritual readiness challenge. What's your message to those people who are watching, and what our role is, and to help with that?
Yeah, I'm a parent too, and now a grandparent, so maybe I'm preaching to the choir here, because it is a challenge. I think one of the things that we have to contend with is the screens. There's so many screens in young people's lives, and the result of screens is that they have a tendency to separate people a little bit. Now, a lot of a lot of counter to that is there's a lot of online gaming, so you have the online communities that are created. But I would contend that there is no substitute for eyeball-to-eyeball engagement. When I was 10 years old playing football, played for a rec league sponsored by the Salvation Army, and I still remember my coach, Joe Warren, just a giant of a man. Here I'm 10 years old, but he got eyeball to eyeball with me to teach me football and teach me how to knock heads. I think that's what we're calling folks back to again. There's a philosophy book called In the Storm that was introduced to me by General Mike Dana. Used to be ACMAC, or not ACMAC, but DEMICS for the Marine Corps. And the philosopher makes the point in there that in our modern age, we never get eyeball to eyeball with people, even through screens, because the cameras on the screens are a few inches above the screen. So you never get to look people in the eyeball. And consequently, you never make that human connection. That's critical.
Yeah. So there's a question here from the audience, and it addresses that from Michael Ignatius McCormick. While spiritual readiness may be integral to the strength of a fighting force, the basis for long-term happiness for individuals is to have high-quality, long-enduring relationships. Exactly what you're saying.
Amen. Yes.
Would having a good relationship with a faith community lead to happy, forceful sailors? So let me kind of broaden that a little bit. How do you deal with that challenge of when a sailor, Marine, Coast Guard would come to you and the chaplain and talk about being a better person, or however they word it, and how do you answer that question about joining a faith community or not joining a faith community, and that challenge you have as a chaplain, and to your point, 100 faiths, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so more than 100 faiths. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, the challenge there is, when we put on the uniform, we represent the federal government. And the ethos of being an American is encapsulated in the Constitution, First Amendment, where the government does not force a religious position on somebody. I'm a big fan of that idea. The government should not be forcing anybody. And when I put on the uniform, in some respects, I'm a representative of the government. So it's inappropriate for me to be heavy-handed in that. And yet, is there a place where we can create a normalized conversation that maybe begins with, well, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but this is what's worked for me. And to introduce people to our own experience, not to be heavy-handed about it or to tell somebody you've got to be like this, but to invite them into a conversation that talks about experience. I'm not going to tell you what to think, but I'm going to tell you what to think about. This is something you should be thinking about. To the point, though, about will it make healthier, happier sailors, the data actually says yeah. There's a researcher up at Harvard, Dr. Tyler Vanderweel, that has identified connection with faith communities as one of the avenues to human flourishing. It is interesting that it's faith communities, not just community in general. But I think it's that transcendent aspect, that it's that connection to something transcendent to us. And this is, there's a lot of data about America becoming less religious. I don't think we're less religious. Some of the data has become more nuanced, where it says, we're as religious as we've ever been, and America's a very religious place, but we've moved to, in some respects, non-established religious movements. But that's not to say that we're not a religious people. So why can't we talk about it? Why can't we just normalize the conversation and put it in the context of spirituality and attending to one's spiritual readiness?
I feel like I'm a commanding officer and you're talking to me as to my role. Is that, back to what you were saying before the break about the connection with the triad and all that. Is this a big part of your role? My question dealt with you dealing with an individual sailor or chaplain dealing, but it sounds to me like those words should be coming out of a commanding officer's mouth as well, right? An executive officer, the command master chief. Is that a big part of your role as you put chaplains on destroyers and things like that?
Absolutely, because what we're trying to do is just help commanders with what's the right language? Let's not make some mistakes in terms of trampling over a person's individual rights. So how do we do this in the right way, and how do we normalize it, and how do we give commanders the language where, hey, yeah, this is okay? I've heard commanders that just do it beautifully. They just normalize it, and they don't pressure people, but they talk about their own faith journey, not in a heavy-handed way, but their own experience. And I just think that's kind of what we're driving towards, is that, hey, this is a normal conversation. We're just being humans here.
So I guess the word resources keeps coming back to me
Yeah.
in this conversation,
Yeah.
right? We mentioned resources for personnel, but
Right.
it seems to me that what you're trying to achieve here is to be a better resource. And you're now a resource for the triad. We have a question here about a couple questions about resources, about what are available resources. How do I learn more about whether it's spiritual readiness or spirituality or whatever? And Vic Smith asks, he comes back to the civilians, but in connection with what you were saying about screens and all that,
Right.
Online or virtual services with the younger generation or information that's online, I guess it's become such a broad issue
Yeah.
that how does today's service member find the chaplain, find the XO who's going to talk to him or her about that spiritual readiness? So I guess let me narrow that question down. And if I'm a sailor and I ask that question, how do our chaplains answer that question? Where are my resources? Where do you refer them to?
Yeah, again, this gets driven by the sailor. So as we interact with the sailor, it's funny because we actually have tools that can kind of walk through a conversation with them to kind of see what's important to you. What would enhance your spiritual readiness? Is it connecting with a faith community? Well, let's help you with that. If it's connecting with maybe some philosophical resources, maybe Stoicism or something else, because a lot of sailors are into that now, that's also where we go with that. But again, it begins with listening to the sailor. And my challenge here, though, is that I'm not connected enough with the sailors. With a limited capacity within the chaplain corps, we can't be everywhere at all times.
Yeah.
In the past, we've done, there's a online chaplain network sort of thing, and there are ways to connect through Military One Source and these different online resources. But I'll be frank about it. I can't. I think the need is greater than what we're able to get to with that. We've looked at creating some apps, and again, there's resourcing, who's going to pay for the app and that sort of thing. But we've looked at creating apps that we could put in the Navy app locker, where you could just download it and it would walk you through the connection process and connect you to maybe your own personal resources, or connect you to a chaplain who could walk with you and help you with that. But again, I'm not satisfied right now. I think we could do better on the connection piece. More chaplains would also help.
Yeah.
But yeah, it really is about connection. To the point, though, about resources, too, I didn't want to get past this, but there is a book on spiritual readiness. So last year, we worked with Dr. Harold Koenig from Duke University, and he was our subject matter expert and trained our chaplain corps in the language and research and analytics of spiritual readiness. And Harold was a great guy to work with. He's been in the field for decades, and just an enormous mind and all. So we're super happy with him. Well, he also did us a solid by putting all his research into a single book called Spiritual Readiness. And I don't get any kickbacks on this, but it's available on Amazon. He just put it out there at cost. It's like $8 if you buy it, the paperback, and it's free if you have Amazon Prime and you want to get the ebook. But if you're looking for those kinds of, where's the research and kind of where it details the nuts and bolts of spiritual readiness, that's probably the best resource for that.
So I'm going to take a leap here, Chaplain Todd,
Yeah.
and make a game call here. I'm going to ask our Vice President for Programs Engagement, Aaron Haroon, to send out to everybody that's registered to this a link to that in case they didn't get the name of that book.
Okay.
So we'll send a link out to everybody and let them know about that book.
Awesome.
So resources. You've used the word partnerships a couple times.
Yes.
Talk to me about the wide array of partnerships that you focus on. You know, we talked about base chaplains, and so I'd like, some about the community.
Yeah.
And there's a question here about air wings. I'll get to that in a second, about chaplains on the aviation side as well. But so let's talk about partnerships and how do you leverage? I don't know if that's the right word. It might have a negative connotation. How do you work with partnerships in order to? We'll never have enough chaplains, right? I mean, arguably, you need one chaplain for every human being, right? I mean, wouldn't it be great to have that confidant? But how do you work with partnerships in order to magnify the impact you're having?
Right. Well, let me start with the simple ones. Yeah. So with the Coast Guard, they have this thing called the Coast Guard Auxiliary. And what we were able to do was to enlist clergy to join the Coast Guard Auxiliary and make them partners with chaplains. So they become an extender of the chaplain's mission. So we call them auxiliary chaplain support. And again, they're local clergy out in the world, but supporting and connected with active duty chaplains. Right now we have over 100 of those people that are out embedded in the communities and supporting the mission that we're doing in the Coast Guard, which is a great thing. I wish I had an auxiliary in the Navy and the Marine Corps to be able to do something similar. I don't yet. But what I do have is just a lot of faith-based NGOs that are out there that have been knocking down our door saying, how can we help you all? How can we connect with you? Now, again, this is something we need to be careful with because we need to vet folks, we need to create realistic expectations between us, we need to apply proper training and supervision and all. But all that being said, we're looking at how we partner with those folks in a more robust way, because simple things like some of the retreats that they offer for folks would be great for our community, but how do we get the word out among Navy, sailors, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, their families, to connect them with these folks? That's the focus of our training this next year, is to introduce our team to the policies, what's out there that they can leverage, and procedures that'll help them to make those connections.
So that's the civilian world.
Yeah.
Inside the Navy.
Yeah.
Inside the Marine Corps, the Coast Guard.
Yeah.
We've talked about the triad. What is your vision for the chaplain inside the Navy and inside the stress environments that we live in?
Yeah.
And maybe you've already answered it with a discussion about the triad, but I'm just struck with, we'll never have enough chaplains, right?
Right.
And how do you build on partnerships inside the service in order to amplify the role of the chaplain?
Yeah, and the question you're asking, it really at its heart is what makes a good Navy chaplain vice a good preacher that we just pulled in off the street. What makes you successful in the Navy is to be part of the Navy, to understand Navy leadership, understand the way Navy operates, and to be part of the team and not some appendage over here that's just kind of, we bring in and you do your thing and then we push you back. So my vision is to create a corps, or to really enhance a corps that flows into the Navy like water. It's not like, I would say oil in the machinery. We're not necessarily the big gears of the machinery, but hopefully we can be the oil of the machinery that helps the Navy operate better and takes care of people and makes them ready for the challenges they're going to face.
So I'm struck with maybe we all don't have the the best understanding of the role of the chaplain.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
How do you tell, especially in this, there's a question here about the politically charged environment we're in and all that, but maybe that aside, but how do you define that role of the chaplain, right? Whether it's in the big picture or the specifics, how do you define that?
Yeah, okay. Well, you're going to have to forgive me because I'm going to go with an ancient definition. I think it's encapsulated by an old Greek word called paraclete. And this is a word that gets applied in the Bible in a couple of different places. But in the ancient Greek world, a paraclete is that person, that advocate that would be draw alongside. The word literally means called alongside. And I think what I have envisioned for our chaplain corps is that group of caring, compassionate individuals who draw alongside the warfighter as they're facing the challenges. And it may be in conflict, but it also may be day-to-day challenges. Troubles with your marriage, troubles with your kids, mad at your chief. Who draws alongside of you in a way that strengthens you, coaches you, and helps you to get to that level of maturity and spiritual readiness that makes you a better human, better sailor, and really happier.
So we're running out of time. Let me just ask you, what are your biggest challenges? I've listened to this. I take it. I think I'll watch the program afterwards. I'm struck with the great progress it sounds like you're achieving with this idea of spiritual readiness, but yet the challenges that you face.
Yeah.
What are the largest challenges that the chaplain corps faces, or you face as chaplains?
Right. So when we talk spiritual readiness, our biggest challenge is to get a lexicon that's common, where everybody knows what language we're speaking, because we're borrowing the language of academia. We're borrowing the language from the researchers and applying it within our setting. Well, that's not necessarily operational language. So we're doing a little bit of translating, but also a little bit of education and saying, hey, this is the right language to use on this. This will keep you safe, Commander. It won't get you in trouble. It will create the environment where we can normalize this conversation. It'll all be good, and it also help the team to mature and be spiritually ready. So it's language, lexicon, getting it into the DNA of the Navy. But it's also about the team that can support that too. I've talked, I need to recruit more. Mm-hmm. I'm really challenged on that one, and recruiting is tough all over. But I'm just going to keep foot stopping it. By the way, we have an 800 number, 888 Navy CHC, short for Chaplain Corps.
All right.
So 888
well
Navy CHC. Yeah,
well done.
I'm pressing out here. But the other thing is for us within our community is also for us to deepen our skill sets, and a lot of that's going to come through mentoring. As we get better at mentoring one another, we're going to get better at mentoring our flock as well. And I think that's a skill set that we need to grow in. And so we're going to be attacking that as well.
Chaplain Todd, I got to tell you, we could do this for an hour or two more. I promised you we would do 1 hour. You're very kind to come over and spend an hour with us. Before we wrap up, anything I've missed or anything you want to address before we wrap up?
Yeah, it's always the question I always get is the concern for suicide. And I share that concern. The numbers are not good, and we want to attack it. I will say that the data on spirituality, spiritual practices, indicate that a person connected spiritually, connected to the transcendent, is 50 to 80% less likely to take their own life. So 50 to 80% is far and above any other intervention resource that's out there. So for me, the concern for suicide is tied to pressing on spiritual readiness. I think that's going to be part of the solution, is if we get people spiritually ready, we're going to see a decline in those numbers. I don't have anything that I can guarantee on that, but the research indicates that. Also, a 60% less cause for depression by connecting to their spiritual resources as well. So the things that get to people's hearts, suicide and depression, spiritual readiness, I think can help move the needle on that.
Chaplain Todd, thank you for being out there.
Oh, Frank,
Thank
thanks
you.
for having me. It's just been
Yeah.
a joy.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you being on the show, but more importantly, really just thank you for being out there and your leadership, your operational background to be able to come into this and talk spiritual readiness in a way that I think people can understand. And I don't often ask people this, but I'd like to ask you to come back. And because I think this is a topic that, as I said, we've heard the CNO talk about.
Yeah.
The Secretary of the Navy was asked what keeps him up at night. It was your world that keeps him up at night.
Yes.
And so, thank you for being out there. We'll get that email out this afternoon with that link if after the show you give us those details.
Yeah.
But thank you very much, sir.
No, it's my pleasure, Frank. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for this SITREP. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I'd also want to thank Navy Mutual Life Insurance for their continuous support of the Navy Memorial. Watch your email. We've got a couple more big events coming up in the SITREP world and the Fantail Breakfast world. As I said, we're talking about a Bridgewing chat that's going to be pretty interesting here coming up. So thank you very much. If I could be so bold and to add to my normal saying of fair winds and following seas, but God bless you. Thank you very much.